We are an advocacy group who thoroughly support the bill put before the Oireachtas for dying with dignity. You'll see this evening that we have an Irish Sign Language interpreter here to help us make sure that everyone gets access to the information, not only from this event, but for future events as well. What we've learned as an advocacy group led by volunteers is that there are so many people in Ireland who are firstly unaware of the bill, what the bill is, who will be eligible for the bill, and to a certain degree why it matters and why it matters now. The bill itself, the legislation that it will provide for, is probably of most importance. It matters most to those who are going to want to avail of it. It's probably going to be the hardest bill that any of the politicians are ever really going to be faced with because it's time sensitive. But what I would ask any politician, any member of the public to do is to put themselves in the position of somebody who has a terminal illness. And then you'll really appreciate just how time sensitive legislation like this is. Because without this legislation, somebody who's terminally ill has other things that they have to consider. And what they don't want to have to do is to go abroad to seek an assisted death. What most people want to do is to remain in Ireland, enjoy what life they have, as well as they can, while they can. So my quest, if you like, is that people keep an open mind. And I know many people on the call tonight appreciate that. So our goal, if you like, as a voluntary group, is to open up conversation, to provide information so that people across the whole island of Ireland can talk about death openly, talk about their choices, their healthcare choices, begin conversations that really do matter. It's a funny thing in Ireland, we celebrate death well once somebody has died. We go to the pub, we chat about the person who's died, we tell stories, we embrace death, but afterwards. But it's only before, well in advance of any terminal illness, that the conversations really need to take place. And to know that there is an option for an assisted death is essential. Change is happening all over the world. Legislation is coming into force in many countries. We've recently seen Tasmania, Spain, Lisbon, Mexico. The whole world has changed, and we saw that with the pandemic. And it changed the lens through which we actually see how we live and also how we die. None more so than for all of the medics who are out there dealing with COVID and having to make decisions every day. Tonight, you're going to hear from Stephen Duckworth. You're going to hear from two of the Irish doctors representing medical assistance in dying in Ireland, abbreviated. Sorry, I just need some water now. I've got so emotional about this. Do excuse me. A group of doctors who are called on Twitter Irish Doctors Supporting MAiD, Medical Assistance in Dying, have very bravely come out, and it is the hope that other doctors, other medics, are brave enough to come out and speak as well. But tonight we have two of the doctors from that group here who will address some of the concerns through talking about proposed legislation and safeguards that will be in place. You're also going to hear three very personal stories, three stories that are important and will give a context. You'll hear from different members of our team, End of Life Ireland, who, by the way, are a very eclectic group of people. We're very different. We have very different beliefs. And I think that's important too. But the one thing that unites us all is that we believe that people are fundamentally compassionate, that nobody wants to see anybody else suffering when there is no need. And some of the stories, which span a period of time, will demonstrate that there can be a good death, that the arguments for and against assisted dying don't change the world over, but the difficulties we have in seeing loved ones suffer are the same, and the climate has changed, and legislation too will change. In 2020, when Gino Kenny presented the bill, Vicky Phelan, who may not be familiar with some of you, came out in support of the bill. Vicky, if you like, if there's one person who could be the most respected person in Ireland alive, it's Vicky. Vicky Phelan has really opened people's hearts to something that is, I think, very important to us all. There have been campaigners before who will have had an influence on the legislation. Most people who are informed about this bill will be aware of the Mari Fleming case. Mari, with the help of her partner Tom Curran, took her case to the Supreme Court. What came out as a result of that? Very sadly, Mari lost her case because there was no constitutional right to die, to be able to choose to die. But what her case did was open the way for legislation to be drawn up that would enable voluntary assisted dying to come into force in Ireland. So Vicky, if you like, Google her. She's the most amazing woman. Mari Fleming was as well. Another woman who inspired us at End of Life Ireland was Gaynor French. Gaynor French, when we first heard her speak, Gaynor, this was in 2017, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. And I'll leave her daughter, who will very shortly speak, tell her story. Gaynor was fearless in her campaigning, and right up until she died, she didn't give up. Time that she could have spent with her family. So in honour of Gaynor, End of Life have pledged that we will pursue this. We will, if you like, provide information so that people can make informed decisions. Decisions, really, that there shouldn't be any question about. Zara, I don't know if you're ready. What I'd like you to do is to come on screen, and on behalf of everybody, thank you, because I know this is quite possibly the first time that you've spoken outside of your family and friends about your mum. Thank you.
Mute.
So thank you, firstly, for giving me the honour of being here. It's so important for me. Why is it so important? Well, the people from End of Life Ireland know my mum. They know her through her campaigning through Dying with Dignity Ireland. She started the campaign when she was diagnosed herself terminally. So I'm Zara. I'm going to talk about my mother from a different point of view, because even though she shared her journey with a diagnosis that was going to kill her, there wasn't much from the family. So ever since I can remember, my mum's always been very, very hardworking, very strong and determined. The earliest memory of my mum is us living in a bedsit and her sometimes having to take me to sixth form with her. She was only 18 when she had me. And even then, she was determined to further herself in life and make a difference. My mum studied constantly for years to improve mine and my brother's lives. And in my early years, she was sometimes working 2 jobs to do that. Another memory I have is a conversation from my early teens, and ironically, it was about terminal illnesses. She said if she was ever diagnosed with cancer, she wouldn't want treatment. She wouldn't want to lose herself in a fog of drugs. She wouldn't want to not remember every second with her family. It's funny how when you're in that situation, things change so much. Much like until I was 25, I said I would never be able to inject myself if I had diabetes. Now I inject myself at least 5 times a day. The first time my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer, it was automatic for me to go and move and be with my family and be there. If you have been close to someone with cancer, you'll know just how cruel of a disease it is. Even the treatment is soul destroying. So having no energy, no immune system, it broke my heart. My mum was the type of person, even though she was suffering, she would help others. So we kept a holistic centre open, which I ran for her. And she set up a group that would support other people with cancer in their journey, because where she lived, there was no support and people were just going through it alone. She would help anybody. It did not mean she'd stop at anything. She'd give people strength that she didn't know when she had no strength herself. When she finally got the all clear, she decided that she had to do more for herself. So she closed the centre and she became a cross-stitch designer, and she thrived. Soon enough, she had some fans all over the world, and I moved to England thinking my family was safe. My mum and me were very close, and we were always in contact and always visiting each other. And after a while, I became pregnant. It's strange, but at 25, I was petrified of telling my mum. So I called my dad and my mum answered. And those of you that know my mum know why I was petrified, because she'd say what was on her mind. So I called my dad and my mum answered. I put the phone down. And my dad were obsessed with Alicia, and Alicia was obsessed with them. She was there for some of my daughter's very first. She took my daughter to get her first proper shoes, the first trip to the sea, and put Alicia to bed when she had her first night in a toddler bed. They say if you go 5 years cancer-free, your chance of it coming back is 25% less. My mum managed 4.5 years. My daughter was only 1. My mum called me and said, "Is your partner there?" And I said, well, I knew what was wrong. And she said to me that it's come back in her bones and her liver. And she was quite happy that it hadn't gone to her brain, because she was very intelligent. And I think that would have destroyed her. Her main priority was to be with her family as much as she could and see my youngest brother hit 18. But my mum being my mum, she didn't go home after the diagnosis and felt sorry for herself. She went straight to the funeral home, and she arranged everything so my dad didn't have to worry because he was rubbish. She spent as much time with us. She'd come to see us and we'd go to Ireland. My mum was given a trial drug, and even though she got given 6 months, she went past that with no problem. We put the word terminal to the back of our minds, and we were spending all the time we could. My daughter would go to my mum's, her nana's, and she would go picking vegetables out of the polytunnel, baking with her nana, everything that I didn't like to do because I don't like mess. My mum would do. She was the fun nana. She even hired a bouncy castle, a full one, to put in our garden just for my little girl. She was ticking her aims one by one. She rode on the back of a motorbike. My dad got her arrested and she climbed a mountain. She gave her underwear to the usher at a Depeche Mode concert to give to the lead speaker, as it had always been one of her dreams. But there was something that she wanted to do for Alicia, something completely personal. So she had two characters, Holmesley Hare and Fergus, from her cross-stitch. She decided to write a story just for my daughter. But of course, her cross-stitch fans were having none of it. She had to get it published, and it was sold all over the world. Obviously, my mum had bad days, and they got worse as time went on. She raised money for charities, but she still had so much fight in her. So she decided to fight. And her fight was for the right to die with dignity. Sorry, I'm trying here. From there, she campaigned. She set up a page, she did interviews, and she built an amazing reputation for herself. She didn't want to lose who she was and have her body wait for her to give up. And she feared so much of the idea of dying dehydrated. I remember the last time I booked flights to go and see my family. My mum called me 2 days before and she told me not to go. She was in Galway Hospital having her leg strained. I don't know why, and I don't know how, but I knew she wasn't going to come out of hospital, no matter how positive she was. It got to a point and my mum called me, my dad actually called me and said, you need to come over. It's not going well. It was the worst call of my life. My daughter was free. By the time I got to Galway Hospital, my dad and younger brother were practically living there looking after her. When I saw my mum, I knew I had to be strong. And like my brothers though, I hadn't seen most of the bad days. I hadn't seen the downward spiral. So for me, the woman that I saw in front of me, that wasn't my mother. My mother was strong. And even when I saw her lying there, I didn't think that she was going to die, but she was a shadow of herself. Everything my mum wanted, she got. So she requested for rum-soaked sultanas from Hotel Chocolate. So me and my partner drove all the way to Dublin and then all the way to Galway just to give them to her. Any food she wanted, we were so desperate for her to eat, we would go around Galway looking for her. But it got to a point where it got too much. My uncles were over and it came to their last day. The one thing that I can remember is when it came to them saying goodbye, I had to leave the room, knowing it was the last time they were ever going to see their sister. And it was the last goodbye they were ever going to make. It came to them going home and knowing that they'd never see their sister was heart-wrenching. Every time a doctor came into the room, they said it wouldn't be long, but she wouldn't go. She was begging to go, but she couldn't. It got to a point where the hospital wasn't enough for her, so we decided that she needed to go to Galway Hospice. And the one request Mum made to the ambulance team was to see more time. On the way to the hospice, they went to Saltwater Bay and they opened the back doors for her to just stare at the sea for 10 minutes. She got to the hospice and they were absolutely amazing with her. But she was still eating soup, so we still couldn't quite get to grips with the idea of her dying. My parents' 17th wedding anniversary passed. They decided to watch the wedding video, which was converted to DVD, and even though my mum's eyes were closed, we knew she could hear it. The hospice tried to make it as special as possible for her. My dad bought her her favourite flowers, which were lilies. On the last day, because we were staying in accommodation, I hugged my mum, even though she couldn't wake up. And I don't know why, but I whispered in her ear, please don't hold on for us. If you need to go, then go. I spent a year kicking myself for saying that, because at 7:30 the next day, I had a knock on my accommodation door and I knew. My dad came in and wrote down telling me that my mum had passed. And my only thought was, you need to go and be with your wife. So I sent him back, got me and my daughter ready, and then went to the hospice ourselves. The staff made her look amazing. She was all in white with some of the flowers that my dad got for their wedding anniversary. And I begged her. I broke down and I begged her to come back. And she had a smile on her face. And I honestly believe that that smile was there because she was happy to go and she was no longer in pain. Sorry.
Take your time.
Was to go and get flowers for the people that let me stay in their home and to get flowers for the team. Everything my mum went through was everything she'd been fighting against. She didn't want to die in pain. She wanted to go on her terms. She didn't want to lose herself to her body shutting down. She wanted to die on her terms and she wanted to die with dignity. We don't let animals suffer, so why should parents? Why should anybody suffer? She didn't want me to remember her as the mum with cancer. She wanted me to remember her as before. But after studying psychology, I understand completely that it's the nightmares we remember more vividly than the happy times. My daughter is 6 on Saturday, and I'm so excited but heartbroken that my mum's not going to be there in person. But I look at her and I look at my mum. My mum campaigned so hard for dying with dignity. I'm campaigning on her behalf, and I never want my daughter to campaign for anything. I'm hoping that by the time she's an adult, she will never have to see me fade. She will never have to see me ask to die. Everyone deserves the right to choose because it's not suicide. You're going to die if you have a terminal illness anyway, so why not go on your own terms? Thank you.
As they do in the deaf community, please give Zara the biggest round of applause, because to stay on screen and to talk about your mum as bravely as you have, Zara.
Thank you. Honestly, it's been an honour, and I want to be part of the fight because whether I'm in England or I'm in Ireland, either country needs this. I don't want my daughter seeing me begging to die. I want her to go, give me a high five, and for me to say, I love you, I've done a good job bringing you up, I'm going.
Here's to a high five that we'll get to achieve that, and together we will, Zara. Together we will fight for this.
Although she's now scared of becoming an adult because I said I don't want to lose my baby girl. So she came in the room yesterday and went, I don't want to grow up, Mummy.
Well, she'll be with you for a long, long time.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
And Gainer's legacy is what you're carrying on now. Huge thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It's been an absolute honour.
Thank you, Zara. To give you a bit of an international context now and an Irish context, what I'm going to do is pass on to Alan Tuffery, one of the founding members of our team. Alan, over to you. You're on mute, Alan. We need you unmuted there.
Great. So I thought the backroom team was going to do that bit. The Dying with Dignity Bill was first presented to the Oireachtas in 2015 as a private member's bill by John Halligan, TD, now retired. It didn't become law then, and last year, Jean O'Kenny, TD, reintroduced the bill, again as a private member's bill. Excuse me. Ireland has been changing quite dramatically over the last few decades and continues to change. Even since 2015, Ireland was a country in which one narrow framework applied to everyone. Now, it has become a more compassionate society which recognizes diversity, a society that increasingly recognizes that different people have different needs. We recently had 2 referendums, the 2015 marriage equality referendum and the 2018 referendum to repeal the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, which prohibited abortion. Both were passed very comfortably and reflect that continuing shift in Irish society towards a society which recognises and respects a higher level of individual autonomy. It is no longer a case of one rule for everyone. Individuals may now take decisions that are best for them in terms of their most cherished values and beliefs, a key part of the concept of personal autonomy. The key word here is compassion. Society's compassion for individuals and our compassion for one another. Both lead us to a desire to live in a kinder world and to reduce suffering. The Dying with Dignity Bill, now being scrutinised by the Justice Committee, aims to allow individuals with a terminal illness to be helped to end their suffering. And here I'm going to echo something that Zara said. We don't grant to our fellow citizens the same merciful end to suffering that we grant to the animals in our care. The bill also has an international context, as Janie mentioned briefly at the beginning. Similar laws are in place in many jurisdictions. In recent times, several Australian states have passed Dying with Dignity Acts, Tasmania being the last. Other jurisdictions, including Spain and Portugal, have recently passed similar laws or are actively considering them. Over 30 countries have legalized some form of voluntary assisted dying, so that in effect, over 200 million people worldwide now have a legal provision that allows them to end their suffering at the end of life. Some jurisdictions have only recently passed their laws on voluntary assisted dying. This means that detailed recent arguments are available to us many times over and can speed up our discussions. Some jurisdictions have had laws on voluntary assisted dying for well over 20 years now. This means that there is a great deal of experience of operating the safeguards and the procedures, and we do not have to start from scratch in Ireland. We can learn from the experience of other jurisdictions and adapt existing procedures to suit our own society. In every country where voluntary assisted dying is available, surveys show that it is massively popular amongst the population at large, and in no case has such legislation been changed. International experience also shows us that when individuals with terminal illness know that voluntary assisted dying is available to them, their quality of life is greatly improved. It removes much stress and anxiety, both for themselves and for their loved ones. It provides an emotional insurance, as it's been called, that allows them to live out the life that remains to them without fear of great pain outside their control. They're also free of the emotional pain that comes with knowing that those who care for them and for whom they care will not have to watch them die suffering and in degradation. This emotional insurance also removes any need for those with a terminal illness to consider suicide, a lonely thought, because in principle, even a discussion with others might implicate them in the serious crime of assisting a suicide. If they decide to travel to end their lives, a complicated and expensive business, they may have to do so alone, and they may have to end their lives early while they still have some decent quality of life left. It is time for us to end the practice of exporting our problems. We've done that for far too long. Finally, voluntary assisted dying works. Surveys here show that Irish people support voluntary assisted dying. Now is the time to enact appropriate legislation in Ireland and to end suffering for the terminally ill and the people who care about them. Thank you.
Alan, thank you very much for placing this in context with what's going on in the rest of the world. As I said before, we've had so much collaboration. We know that the expertise is there for our politicians and legislators to draw on. The next person I'd like to bring on screen is Justin McKenna. Justin is a founding member on our team of volunteers. He is a practicing solicitor with over 42 years, specialising in end-of-life matters. He's been instrumental in our understanding of the implications of the current legislation and the proposed bill. He's contributed in a voluntary capacity as a committee and a council member to the Law Society in Ireland, and he served as chairman on the Probate and Trust Committee. Somebody with that amount of experience is worth listening to. Justin, over to you.
Thanks, Janie. And thank you, Zara. That was a moving account, and it really did set the mood for us tonight. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the solicitor's perspective, looking at it from a legal point of view. I have been a part of conversations within families for 4 decades now, when they sit down to discuss their personal intentions, usually married couples or partners, and they discuss all things over which they have power at the end of their lives. Many of them realize for the first time that they are worth, in financial terms, more dead than alive. Then, in order to keep that wealth in the family, I will influence those decisions that they may have made on how to distribute their wealth when they're gone. The conversation on wills provides me with the opportunity to instigate the next one on what should happen prior to death in the event that they might lose their mental capacity. Well, who makes the decisions then? I explain that there are 2 types of decisions. One on the subject of finances and personal affairs, and the other on care. It's only since 1996 that we in Ireland have been allowed to delegate that power to other people. Prior to that, the situation was governed by the lunacy regulations of 1871. And strangely, this piece of Victorian legislation is still with us today. For my clients, the enduring power of attorney may be the solution to the pre-death dilemma, but for some who wish to continue the conversation to the next level, it's not. For those who have not had this conversation, who have not sought legal advice or asked questions, the only option is wardship. In this case, proceedings are instituted usually by the next of kin to have the person of unsound mind, referred sometimes as the PUM, committed as a ward of court, where the PUM is placed into the care of the state and all assets surrendered to the office of the Accountant General. Well, our legislators have not come to terms with this antediluvian law, but they're working on it. In 2015, the Oireachtas rushed through the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act with the view to abolishing the office of wards of court. Perhaps it was a pill that was too big to swallow, or a needle that was designed for a horse. In any case, while the office of the Director of Decision Support Services was established, the act has not yet commenced. However, to get back to that conversation that I was talking about, I haven't brought you to the next level. Who decides how we die? As a solicitor, I can advise no further. Unless death is accidental or homicidal, my clients will enjoy or endure a natural death, probably in the hands of the medical profession. If a decision is to be made, it will be the doctor's. If the individual requests assistance in the process, the assistor will be committing a crime punishable by 14 years imprisonment. That includes the doctor. The law in Ireland is known as the common law and inherited from our British neighbours and adopted by other countries around the world where English is spoken. Our legal system recognises the independence of the courts and the power of the judges to make laws. Ultimately, all our indigenous laws are governed by our written constitution, and the courts must observe and abide by it. In so doing, they may have recourse to other sources in Europe, including the European Convention on Human Rights. In 2013, our Supreme Court ruled that the law on voluntary assisted dying did not require a change in our constitution. Instead, it falls within the remit of our legislators, our TDs, to enact a set of rules that will put in place the safeguards necessary to protect the country's citizens when they eventually are allowed to have a say in how they wish to die. The Dying with Dignity Bill lays out the groundwork for these rules. I do not believe a Dying with Dignity Act is the appropriate place to house the safeguards. These, in my opinion, belong with the Assisted Decision-Making Act that I've already referred to. The bill is brief, 15 sections, and provides for the setting up of a review committee and ministerial regulation on the terms of implementation. The roles of an attending medical practitioner and an assistant healthcare professional are critical to the authorization. The person qualifying under the bill is defined as somebody who is terminally ill, over 18, and lives on the island of Ireland. There must be a clear and settled intention as expressed in a declaration. Terminally ill means incurable and progressive. It cannot be reversed by treatment. The doctor is not required to make a prediction as to when death will occur. The declaration, from the point of view of an advising solicitor, is the pivotal document. It must be witnessed independently and then countersigned by two doctors who will state that the patient is terminally ill, has capacity, and the clear and settled intention is reached voluntarily on an informed basis. Their endorsement will also state that the patient was made aware of the availability of palliative, hospice, or other care. The two sections of the bill that most affect medical practitioners refer to assessment of capacity and assistance in dying. The limitations of this presentation do not afford me the time to elucidate the detail of what constitutes capacity or the parameters of administration of substances. However, a cooling off period of 14 days may be reduced to 6 if medical opinion suggests death within a month. There is provision for conscientious objection, provided the objecting doctor makes arrangements for the transfer of care to enable voluntary assisted dying to take place. So the third level of conversation becomes meaningful in the context of a law that allows it. It may begin in a solicitor's office or doctor's surgery, but at the very least, the right to have that discussion will respect the individual's freedom to choose and conduct. Thank you.
Justin, thank you. A lot to take in there, and it's great to have this recording because I know people will want to play back and just pick up on some of the key points there. Certainly, as I said, you've been instrumental in helping us understand better the implications of the bill. The bill, as we know, will enable people from Northern and Southern Ireland to consider applying for choice, for the option to be able to choose when and where they die, as long as they meet the conditions. So it's fitting that we begin to include people who have stories to share, who live in Northern Ireland as well. My next speaker is Judith Wainwright. And though her story, if you like, goes back a little while, what it does show is that the difficulty in seeing somebody who you love suffer at length never changes. It hurts and it is extremely hard. Judith, thank you for agreeing to share your story. We only connected fairly recently, but we've had many conversations, and I know this means a lot to us as well as to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie, for this opportunity. Like Zara, I'm absolutely honoured. When I first came to Northern Ireland, County Down, little did I know that my father would be taking his last journey, his final journey. From a strong, loving, thoughtful man with Yorkshire genes, living life to the full and still working full time. He was a true Christian in the sense of the word. He was gentle, he was kind, and he was humane, and he did not suffer fools. He knew what he wanted, and he tried to go out and get it and provide for his family, keeping us all safe. He was a big man to me, very big. And as a child, he would carry me on his shoulders, and I used to hold on to his ears. And for some unknown reason, I called them his aches. These were his aches. His love, though, was engines. Any engine. In fact, my brother told me when I was really little that it was oil that ran through his veins, and I believed him. I really believed him. He joined the RAF and flew many, many aeroplanes, different types, in World War II. But it was an engineer that he excelled, patching them up, keeping them flying. Those including Douglas Bader and Peter Townsend. And he even helped bury Guy Gibson VC's beautiful black Labrador when he was killed on the road. He boxed for the RAF, and I still have his trophies, which I treasure. He served all over Great Britain and in Egypt. He never missed Remembrance Sunday, ever. He loved dirt bike riding and competed many times, even mastering the wall of death. In the 50s, he built a car from scratch. We called it Moggy. He always gave names to his cars. He built it in his garage, which was an amazing place. It had a place for everything, and everything had its place. He used to have me out there bleeding brakes on cars. Not that I really knew anything about them, but we'd talk, and they were good memories. We had a few more cars after that, and a caravan, until he got his beloved Land Rover, which was just on screen, PAC 75. I still have it. We had great holidays. And you know, we always stopped if somebody was broken down, and he would get out of his car with his toolbox and he would go and help them if he could. And he was even awarded Knight of the Road from the News of the World. He loved his freedom and his independence, and he loved the open road. When I was 12 years old, we were on holiday, and he saw a trip to the war graves in France. So off we went. Poor Mum stayed in the caravan with the dog. But I was amazed, so amazed on that journey. And I'll never forget it. And still to this day, I visit war cemeteries wherever I go. Do you know, I never heard my parents argue, ever. I came home from school once and said to them, "Why don't you argue?" And Mum said, "Why do you want to know?" And I said, "Well, I'd have something to talk about at school. Everybody else talks about their parents arguing." He was a wonderful man. He enjoyed his grandsons, and they were in the Cubs. So he went into his garage and he got himself an easel and he made a flip chart. And the Cubs group used to come once a week for some time. And he just absolutely adored it. He really did. I now realise how lucky I was to have such a wonderful family, a wonderful father, such beautiful memories, and I treasure them. I still have all his books with his photographs in. He loved photography, and I even have up there. I don't know if you can see. There it is. Plane crashed. I still have it there, hanging on the wall. In the winter, he had a fall and ended up in hospital. And unfortunately, he was diagnosed with motor neurone. I'd only ever seen my father sick twice, once in 1959 with malaria, which was really scary, and then in 1967 with pneumonia. He and we had no understanding of the disease, no understanding of motor neuron whatsoever, no idea what the prognosis would be. And the awful thing was, the doctors didn't seem to be any help whatsoever. There was no Google, no internet. We couldn't just pick up the phone or pick up the computer mouse and take a look and see what was going to happen. We just didn't know. He was hospitalized a few times. He never complained. He never lost his sense of humor. He spent his last holiday with us in Northern Ireland, which he absolutely adored. He said it was like coming home, because where he was from Yorkshire was Bronte country, and this was Bronte country too. I'm now nearing the age of my father when he passed, and I understand better now how he felt. We watched him fade away, reduced to a 6-stone skeleton. It was for him an agonizing journey, his strength seeping away, unable to do the smallest of things. He was wheelchair bound, trapped in a useless body. My mother was his carer and his rock. He had his voice to the very end, so we spent a lot of time talking. And he said to me one day, if I were a dog, I would be put out of my misery. He left us in 1990 on the 15th of February, 12:15, weeks away from his 80th birthday. He was cremated and his ashes were scattered over the runway of Biggin Hill Aerodrome, where he served in his last squadron, 605. Great memories, good memories, such good memories, but a bad death, a very bad death. Like my father, I'd not want anyone to suffer the way he did. The word of the 20th century was rights. Let's make the word of the 21st century choice. The world's moved on. Please support us. And the right choice for the terminally. Thank you so very much for listening. Thank you for giving me this chance to tell my story.
Judith, thank you. I know it's been hard revisiting memories, and the good were lovely, as you said, to look back on,
Yeah.
but also what it does do is bring back the upset at the end.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Thank
As you say, there wasn't Google at the time. It was a very different time, but the context, if you like, is the same. There was no need for suffering then, prolonged suffering, and there is no need now. And that's really what we want to put back to politicians. As you say, it's an individual's right to choose. And if we can be kind and compassionate in that, and that the legislation can be made with robust safeguards, it's time. It's time for that. Judith, we'll be talking, I know, in the next short while, very soon. Thank you again. The next person I'd like to bring on screen is somebody who's been incredibly supportive to the whole issue of voluntary assisted dying. He's an avid supporter in the UK. He's been a great he's been a great supporter and advocate for disability, and is just somebody who I think everyone has a huge amount of respect for. His story is very different. I know of his story. I don't know the exact story. So for me, it's something that I really am looking forward very much to hearing. Stephen Duckworth, thank you hugely for being here, for the time that you've given, that you continue to give. Over to you.
Janie, thank you very much indeed. And I hope I can follow our predecessor speakers. I want to tell you really about my journey from being somewhat opposed to assisted dying to someone who's now quite in favour of it. And I suppose it's the journey that we will be seeking politicians, both in the island of Ireland and also in Great Britain, to go through a journey that's necessary to become committed to something that's really so important, as we found out from everybody else. So my journey began, I suppose, 40 years ago, when at the age of 21, I was a medical student in London. I broke my neck in a rugby accident. And it was a life-changing injury with some darker moments, but I never really thought about suicide. I didn't really think it was that bad. I was doubly incontinent. I had no sensation below my neck. I was paralyzed in all 4 limbs. I had pain everywhere. I had a spasming stomach and was frequently sick. I had legs that jumped all over the place, and I felt faint most of the time and was continually passing out. But that was the easy bit. I was in hospital for 9 months during that time and went back to my parents' home for 3 months, and then came back to live in a flat in London with my partner Rose, who's my fiance, and we lived near the hospital where I was training. I went back to medical school and completed my training, and at that time we'd been engaged for 6 weeks only, and that's probably what kept me going. About 12 months after I'd been back at medical school, I developed an infection in my left leg, resulting in osteomyelitis, a bone infection, which resulted in me spending 3.5 years in hospital. I had some major surgery, which they had to remove the top half of my left leg, remove half my pelvis on the left-hand side, and they actually managed to join the rest of the leg back onto me again. So I'm a semi-complete person now. And I was never actually terminally ill, so even with assisted dying legislation, I'd have safeguards in place, and I felt at the time, thank goodness, because I was feeling suicidal, and I actually asked a fellow medical student to give me an overdose, and she thankfully refused. And over the next few years, I got better. I gained an MSc in rehabilitation studies. I did a PhD focusing on disability and equality issues, and set up a successful consulting business. And together we had 4 children, naturally, not with IVF. The higher the level of your spinal cord injury, the more likely your wedding tackle is to operate, with my then girlfriend, now wife, Rosemary. And all of our boys, they're all 4 of them were boys, played rugby. And a highlight of that was watching the younger 2 boys, they're identical twins, winning a national under-schools under-15 tournament at Twickenham. So that's why I felt it was good that I hadn't really been given the medicine by my fellow medical student. At this time, I started talking to other people about assisted dying, and I had a very negative approach towards this. And looking back on it now, the reason was because I was really naive. I was quite ignorant. I was completely ill-informed and didn't understand the issues and the way that safeguards might work. But I was quite strident in my views, and I wrote 2 articles for a disability magazine about why I was against assisted dying. And then shortly after those articles were published, I was approached by Lord Charlie Faulkner. In fact, my telephone rang, my mobile phone rang, and my helper answered it for me, put it to my ear, and this voice came on. Hi, it's Lord Charlie Faulkner here. Will you join my commission on assisted dying? And we sat in 2011, and we took evidence for 12 months. We had over 12 sessions, and we had huge volumes of written evidence submitted, which included also some visits to the jurisdictions at that time where assisted dying was actually permitted, including Dignitas in Switzerland. The evidence to me was astonishing. We heard stories of people killing themselves by drinking 3.5 liters of bleach because they couldn't afford to go to Dignitas, and spending weeks dying afterwards. Other stories are too harrowing to tell now. Only 2 years ago, a man died of throat cancer who was in intractable pain. He actually walked into the middle of a motorway and got run over by a truck. And then I thought, what about the driver? There was the elderly couple, an 81-year-old and an 80-year-old. He had terminal illness with intractable pain, so they saved up his morphine for a rainy day, and that day came along. They both decided to take the medicine as an overdose, and they survived the morphine overdose, but the paramedics were called. The man had a do not resuscitate notice on, so he was allowed to die, but she was given antidotes to the morphine and improved and regained her health at the age of 80. And then she was in prison for 18 hours, still in her hospital night dress. And the court case lasted for a further 18 months, during which time she suffered so much. Imagine losing your terminally ill husband in such a horrendous manner and the indignity that then followed. But surely the sign of a grown-up adult society is how it treats its most desperate citizens. And there's nothing more desperate, as you've heard tonight, than seeing someone dying in intractable pain. Palliative care physicians cannot prevent this experience of pain, despite those that claim they can. They are wrong, and they are killing people anyway. As all my fellow GPs who trained with me, and I'm still in contact with 60 of my fellow medical students who became GPs, who use continuous deep sedation, which is a heavy dose of morphine on a regular basis, which may stop some of the pain, but it also has a double effect of stopping you breathing slowly as you die over several days rather than the minutes with your family. You're absent from your family in a zombie-like state. So sitting on Lord Faulkner's commission gave me the evidence that I needed to come to an informed decision rather than the knee-jerk emotional reaction that had previously been the case. Assisted dying, in my now informed opinion, is the only way forward. I'd always argued for autonomy, choice and control over how we as disabled people live our lives. But dying is part of that living process. We want autonomy, choice and control over that as well. I know for one that if I were to develop an inoperable throat cancer, probably one of the only areas of the body or brain cancer that I can feel that was causing me intractable pain, I would see it as my human right to have access to assisted dying. But I don't want to drive my wheelchair off the platform of a railway station in front of an oncoming train. Because what about the driver and his family and his friends? I would need assistance. A doctor would need to put a needle in my arm, assisting me to die. A doctor would need to attach a syringe driver to that needle, assisting me to die. Then that would need to be connected to a computer, assisting me to die. A computer programmer would have to write a program, assisting me to die. Someone would need to turn the computer on, assisting me to die. Then the computer could take over, assisting me to die. Do you want an assisted death? The computer could ask on the screen or by voice like Professor Stephen Hawking. Blink once for yes or twice for no. The program would then pause for 2 minutes and the computer would start again. Are you sure you want to die? And so the process goes on 3 times. 3 times the opportunity to pull out until finally the computer activates the syringe driver and the barbiturates and potassium go into my arm and I die painlessly in seconds, like going under in an anesthetic. You can't even count up to 10. I suppose the only issue for me would be is the fact that I'd have a bit of a hangover, because I would have had a hell of a party on a sunny beach with all my family and friends celebrating my life on the day before I died. I would have drunk far more and my fair share of alcohol, enjoying the party with my friends, I would die happy, peacefully, and with dignity. I'm not asking anyone else to do the same as me. I just want them to have the choice. I'm not asking doctors who are opposed to the idea to help, only those who are supportive. I'm not asking for anything other than my basic human rights. And I'd just like to end with two quotes from a book that was published recently called Last Rites, written by Sarah Wotton and colleagues, and Sarah's on the call tonight. One is from a disabled person and one is from a religious person in England. The first is Professor Tom Shakespeare. Some of you will know of Tom. Tom has what we doctors call achondroplasia, or dwarfism, or a person of short stature, if you really want to be politically correct. And Tom wrote, "I'm a disability rights advocate. I'm also a religious person. Because of these commitments, not despite them, I support the option of assisted dying as a choice for those who are terminally ill. You are free to ignore me," he said, "but I don't think you are free to ignore the facts in this book." And finally, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey, he states, "The moral, and for me the Christian case for change in the law is irrefutable. COVID-19 has forced us all to rethink our certainties about death and dying. How can a country that cares so deeply for victims of this virus be so indifferent to those who, at the end of life, suffer indignity and intractable pain?" Thank you.
Stephen, thank you. I have no words. As Chief Executive of Disability Matters Global, they are fortunate indeed to have you leading that company and all of the other initiatives that I know you've been involved with for a long time now. I think everyone would agree that with such a comprehensive explanation, rational opinion from somebody who's been through so much yourself, and to have heard you come from a position of being not in favour of it, to getting hold of the right information, to being informed, having conversations, listening to other people who are in that position where they have no choice. They have to accept their prognosis, and what they want to do is live as well as they can while they can. And I think it's the least that can be done through careful legislation. Thank you hugely.
That's
I
a
know
pleasure.
we're going to continue our conversations.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you. It brings me on now to the next person who is going to share his story with us, Ken Olinger. It's a personal story, and yet equally Ken comes from the position of being a retired doctor. Ken, over to you.
I think I've unmuted myself. My name is Ken Olinger. I'm a recently retired general practitioner in Ireland for 38 years. I want to present a personal view in regard to the issue of dying with dignity. I can only recall 2 patients who made requests for me to medically assist in their deaths. One was a relatively young man in his early 60s with multiple sclerosis, which had progressed to quadriplegia and difficulty breathing and even speaking. And an older man with widespread metastases of prostate cancer. Oh, let me mute myself. I thought I did this. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
We hear you perfectly, Ken. Thank you.
Did you hear the first part there?
Yes, we did.
Oh, okay. Both of these men were competent and well informed as to their conditions and prognosis. I felt unable to help either of them due to the illegality of such actions at the time. And as a result, their physical and mental distress was prolonged and upsetting for themselves and their families. Doctors around the world have been in similar situations, and I am sure that an increasing number of patients will ask for advice about their options for pain and distress-free deaths. Indeed, my colleagues and I have discussed the option of medical assistance in dying as our own personal choice in certain situations. And instances are widely known for centuries of so-called passive euthanasia, either through discontinuing treatment or through the double effect of terminal pain relief and sedation. Medical assistance in dying and palliative care should be complementary, not exclusionary. The expertise and compassion of hospice and palliative care teams have taught me a great deal over the years, and they have adapted not only to medical advances, but also to feedback from patients and their families. Palliative and hospital care will always be essential and require adequate funding, training, accessibility, and timely intervention. But experience has shown that control of physical and mental symptoms will ultimately fail for some patients. The reviews in Canada and Oregon have noted that despite the extremely high percentage of those with a terminal illness engaged with palliative care, has still produced a cohort that will seek medical assistance in dying due to their unresolved physical and mental symptoms. In 2016, I was faced with a very personal situation with my 98-year-old father in New Jersey. He had been a physician for over 70 years and an associate professor of medicine. He was dying with intractable pain from end-stage peripheral vascular disease, which had progressed to gangrenous changes in his feet. Surgery was not an option, and his ability to walk, sleep, and care for himself had become severely limited. His condition actually led him to attempt to starve himself to death over 3 days. Both he and my family were aware of the terminal prognosis, and I believe that if New Jersey had legalized medical assistance in dying, he would certainly have considered that option. Unfortunately, it was 3 years later that this was passed in that state. In summary, the autonomy of informed personal choice and compassion for suffering have been the bases for dying with dignity in countries around the world. Over 20 years' experience has shown no evidence of medical assistance in dying being driven by social vulnerability, physical disability, or coercion. The increasing numbers availing of such protocols do not prove the scaremongering idea of a slippery slope. Indeed, they endorse the choice of this option for dying individuals. In my opinion, compassion and the respect for the rights and personal autonomy of patients, along with ethical considerations and firm safeguards, will provide sound foundations for the Dying with Dignity Bill. Thank you.
Ken, thank you. You actually bring to the fore the issues that are going to be addressed by the Irish doctors who are on with us tonight, Andrew Lyne and Brendan O'Shea, both highly involved with their local communities and in palliative care as well. What I'd like to do first of all is to bring Andrew on. Both of the Irish Doctors submission, just for everybody's information, is available, and you can download it on the End of Life Ireland website. You can also download the bill itself. You can download our submission. As I say, we had international collaboration on that, and it's all evidence-based. You can also access the Dignity in Dying submission, which also has a lot of information in. First of all, I'd like to pass over now to Dr. Andrew Lyne. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on this evening. I should explain that Irish doctors supporting medical assistance in dying, and I apologize for the long worded title. It's as descriptive and as short as we could get and agree on. Basically, a number of doctors started a conversation on WhatsApp groups last November and we got together and formed this group. Then a few of us formed a subcommittee that agreed that we would create a submission for the Justice Committee Dying with Dignity bill. And in that process, we looked at a few different experiences in different countries. And we particularly were appreciative of the data that came from Canada. When we looked at Canada, there were some differences. They do include disability as a qualifying criteria, but the similarities in the processes and the safeguards we thought were very important, and we thought we could learn from the Canadian experience. So I'm just going to summarize a little bit about what we learned from that Canadian experience. So in Canada, it was introduced approximately 5 years ago. And since then, each year, there's been an increase in the number of people accessing assisted dying. So that in 2019, about 2% of decedents each year, on that year, died through assisted dying. The underlying conditions were, as one would expect, they were predominantly cancers with almost 70%. And the other conditions were respiratory, cardiovascular, or neurological. One of the things that was of interest to us, because our group is predominantly composed of GPs, was that in Canada, GPs provide 65% of the assisted deaths. So the majority of people who access assisted dying in Canada do so through their GP. And I think this, to us, reinforced the fact that GPs, I think, are very important if we're going to provide this service to our patients. One of the things that surprised us a little was when we looked at the data regarding the method of assisted dying, whether it was going to be oral or intravenous. So in 2019, of almost 6,000 people, just shy of 6,000 people accessed assisted dying in Canada. Only 7 did so through oral medication. And having spoken with doctors in Canada, the IV administration is just much better for the patient. And we think it's very important that that's reflected in the legislation, that patients are given that choice. I think the choice is what this is all about. And they should have choice of either oral or intravenous. Some people always report concerns regarding vulnerable groups. And the data from Canada was really comprehensive. And when you looked at the data and the demographics of people accessing assisted dying, there was no overrepresentation of people from vulnerable groups within that. In fact, people accessing assisted dying were likely to come from higher income groups, were more likely to be married, and more likely to be living at home. And this isn't consistent with the concept of vulnerable people being coerced. Also, a concern from some people is that the lack of palliative care is a drive for assisted dying. And in Canada, 89% of people who access assisted dying have access to palliative care, and 82% have had palliative care services. So again, I think the lack of palliative care is not an important factor for assisted dying. I think it's a separate choice. Probably the most important thing for us was that the Canadians have done a fantastic job of collecting data, publishing that data, and presenting it in a very transparent way. It was very easy for us to access it. And that's given us confidence that assisted dying can be introduced into Ireland in a safe, responsible manner. It's also given Canadians great confidence in assisted dying as well. Prior to the introduction of assisted dying, 82% of Canadians supported it. Now, in surveys, 86% of Canadians support assisted dying. And if you, surveys of people with terminal illness in Canada, it's 80% of people support the right to assisted dying. So in summary, I think that our Canadian the Canadian experience has given us confidence that voluntary assisted dying can be introduced into Ireland in a safe and responsible manner. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you. I know for some people, if you there are questions that you might want to put to our panel, please put them in the chat, and time permitting, what we'll do is we'll pick up on those. I just want to throw in there as well, it is about peace of mind, it is about choice. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that we don't like to talk about death and dying. And I just want to throw into the mix, it's only, or the question that I have is it only when you're faced with your own mortality, when either you or somebody close to you has received a diagnosis, that you really consider what's ahead of you? And the reason why I say this was because even after my father died in the mid-70s, a long, very long, protracted death, I was in my mid-20s, I didn't really think about it. That was how you died then. I wasn't even aware that an assisted death would be possible. Fast forward into the year 2000, and I had my first diagnosis of cancer. I had a full hysterectomy, I had radiotherapy. It was a case of the way we were brought up was deal with it, get on with your life. And I didn't really think about it. I didn't want to talk about it because for me, life was for living. I got over it. But I became aware over the subsequent years that there were things happening in other parts of the world. And as I say, it was when I heard Gaynor French talk in 2017. That was, if you like, the one story, just as in the book, that one patient. With doctors, it is whether it's that one patient, with us as human beings, it's that one story that you hear that makes you want to do something, makes you want to learn more about it. As the world changed just before lockdown, my world changed yet again. I had my second bout of cancer. I was incredibly lucky. It was discovered as the result of a chance conversation with a consultancy when I was in the HDU for a diagnosis of late onset diabetes type 1, a chance conversation. So just before lockdown, when the first cases across the world in November were beginning to emerge, I was in hospital having surgery. At the beginning of lockdown, I began to recover, I began to eat again, but it really made me think. And we had started then as a group, the group that came together unofficially in 2017, once we heard Gaynor French speak. We knew we had to do something. We knew we had to set up an advocacy group because the time was right. And I'm sharing that experience not just to say, I don't know what I'm trying to say really with it, but I know that I was incredibly lucky. I don't have to face that end journey at the moment. What I do know is, as and when I do, because let's face it, when something happens to you, there's every chance with a family with autoimmune disease. I am type 1 diabetic. I've had cancer twice. Something's going to come back and bite me on the bottom. When it does, I would love to know. I would love to have peace of mind to know that I can stay in the country that I love and have a choice. That really is the bottom line for me and many others on our team. I've rambled, I've interrupted the flow of things. It tends to be what I do. So without going on any more, what I'd like to do is bring Dr. Brendan O'Shea in, who will touch on possibly the aspect that will give reassurance to people, because we want to talk about safeguards. We know that legislation could be drawn up, but to look at the safeguards, to look at the, if you like, the patient-doctor relationship, because it is going to be with the medics. You have that relationship of trust. you journey with people. So Brendan, if I can pass over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Janie, and thank you so much for putting us all in the room together, and thanks very much to Catherine with your signing, and I am just amazed at your stamina and keeping us all on track. As per your introduction, I collaborate with Andrew and with Irish Doctors Medical Assistants in Dying. We're just over 100, and we formed up fairly informally, motivated by a belief that medical assistance in dying is a service that should be available to people who live in Ireland. That's our unifying our bond, if you like. My own background, I've been a general practitioner for just over 30 years in Kildare. I'm an assistant adjunct professor in Trinity, where my research and teaching interests include care of people with multimorbidities. These are the over 50s, okay, who get increasingly medically complex, and also end-of-life planning and end-of-life care. I also have an association with the Irish Hospice Foundation, and I'm also on council on the ICGP. The views I'm expressing here, however, are very much the views of Irish Doctors Medical Assistants in Dying, and not the ICGP and the Irish Hospice Foundation. The ICGP and the Irish Hospice Foundation have made collectively, they have a similar perspective on this. They are not taking a position pro or against, but they are both strongly of the view that Irish society needs to vigorously and properly discuss this issue. And I think that's important, and that discussion is based on compassion, thoughtfulness, care of the individual, and science. That this really has to be the foundation of our conversation. Jenny, in your preamble, you asked a really interesting question, like, do people ever actually think about dying? I think this group here have done a lot of thinking about dying, but for the majority of people, I think people don't, and we see this in practice. Most of us in general practice, most days of the week, we always have 1 or 2 consultations each day where you reach a point of high uncertainty around possibly a diagnosis or a prognosis. And in that space, I will often pitch in, well, you know, doctors differ and patients die, when we're trying to figure out what's the best thing to do. And I follow that up by saying, well, if it's any consolation, all the doctors die as well, sooner or later. So in terms of this issue, any of us who are registered medical practitioners, we can look at it several different ways, but particularly we can look at it as a doctor, but also as a person. And certainly as an individual, as a citizen, I would strongly believe that this service needs to be available. So how can we proceed with that? Andrew outlined the experience and the evidence from Canada. And we feel the proposed legislation and that experience fit very well together. In my work with the ICGP during 2016 to 2018, I had an involvement around the repeal of the 8th Amendment and represented the college at the Citizens' Assembly, and subsequently participated in the college inputs to the Oireachtas committees. So that has provided me with some insight in terms of how this part works. For us to be successful as a group in Ireland, we have to be able to engage at several different levels if we want to get this through in a way that's going to serve people well. We have to understand quickly which of the chessboards we're on at any given time, and we've got to be able to move the pieces appropriately. So if we're going to make this service available, well, this evening you can understand that there are already over 100 registered medical practitioners who are positively supportive of it. And as a volume service, we know that every year, even in a COVID year, about 35,000 people die. And we understand that in other systems where this service is available, in the order of 4 to 8% of people will avail of it. So from the point of view of setting it up, it's not a big workload. It doesn't require an awful lot of money. It can rely, and Alan outlined it, several speakers outlined, it can absolutely rely on procedure and protocol elsewhere. So none of those things are a significant obstacle. In terms of actually operationalizing it, the Oireachtas will need to instruct. The Oireachtas will need to instruct the Department of Health and the HSE. The Oireachtas might be impelled to do that through the current piece of legislation. The Oireachtas could also be impelled to do that if it did, as it did per the repeal of the 8th Amendment, and then used a Citizens' Assembly. And the Citizens' Assembly, a very democratic manoeuvre, provided very explicit direction, which was passed on to an all-party Oireachtas committee. So that's another route by which this might happen. So we all need to watch this space, and we all need to campaign. Politicians need to understand, not Gina, who's leading us, okay, but all the politicians need to understand that this is important to the electorate. So Janie's throwaway comment, it's helpful. Yes, we're all going to die. We should be thinking a little bit more about it, and we should be making our case in all of the different fora and networks and groups that we can do. So if the Department of Health gets a clear imperative from the Oireachtas, the Department of Health can then engage with the Medical Council and with the postgraduate training colleges, particularly the ICGP and also the Royal College of Physicians in Ireland. In our group, we're of the view probably that medical bodies, any of the postgraduate training colleges, probably shouldn't have a yay or a nay. We should really be informing the conversation, but we should be awaiting the instruction of the Oireachtas. So if the instruction goes out that this service is to be operationalized, there's a small piece of training and education that requires to be made available. As Andy has alluded to, in Canada and also in the Netherlands, the bulk of this service is provided in general practice. There are good reasons for this. In Ireland, people still have a fairly intimate long-term relationship with their GP, which means that the GP is well placed to understand the circumstances, is well placed to have serial conversations over weeks, days or months, whatever, or years, whatever is required. And certainly there are a number of GPs who are positively disposed and feel passionate about this. So there's a small piece of education. Ideally, that should be made available through the Irish College of General Practitioners and or the RCPI. In keeping with early medical termination of pregnancy, it's a small piece of work for the HSE to issue a contract for people who would like to provide the service. That if you've carried out the training and if you submit to the contract, then you would be able to provide the service. And really it can roll out as easily as that. There are similarities between early medical termination of pregnancy and medical assistance in dying, because they're ethically very sensitive, they're ethically complex, they're profoundly emotive issues, they're incredibly important for individual people, they're medically simple, they're not technically complex. And they both fit into, and our friends in the Irish Hospice Foundation will say this, they both fit into the community, to the home. This is where this care should be considered, and ideally it should be provided. Within our group, we are confident that should the opportunity present itself, should the Oireachtas act either through legislation or through directly instructing the Department of Health, there would be no real difficulty in setting up this service. And all of us who are involved in the care of people, and every GP typically will have somewhere between 5 to 15 people in their practice, in their own list, will die each year. Not because we're bad doctors, this is just the way life is. We are confident that there will certainly be adequate clinical expertise and support in the community to make this an effective and valued part. So that's the operational chessboard, that's the political chessboard, that's the clinical care chessboard. There's a regulatory chessboard. And then I'm going to take 90 seconds on some of the arguments that are coming out against it. And again, just to reflect on some of the thoughts and consensus we have in our own group, Irish Doctors for Medical Assistance in Dying. No one should have to consider medical assistance in dying because they feel that they're a burden. Many of us would disagree with this. I have very few things that I actually have control over. One of them is my own life. And I know as a citizen, for me, it would be a legitimate reason to end my own life if I was in this type of prognosis, where there was unbearable suffering, profound disability, and I would not want my family to have to carry that burden if, in my view, it was the wrong thing, and if the prognosis was hopeless. We can't have medical assistance in dying because it'll undermine the development of adequate palliative care in Ireland. They are two completely separate issues. And I think we've got to be very clear about this one. Earlier on, we've reflected on the slippery slope discussion. And again, the evidence from Belgium, the Netherlands, Canada is that the slippery slope doesn't exist. It's a disturbing idea. It's a disturbing thought. And then the positive arguments, they've been very positive, accurately and powerfully reflected by the earlier speakers. So going back to Janie's question, how do we initiate these conversations about dying and death as a group, at a societal level and individually? From the Hospice Foundation, I would bring a copy of Think Ahead, which you can't read because it's back to front because of the camera. But we use it in practice. It's a fantastic tool for guiding people, bringing them into the conversation, and there's an evidence base behind it. So if you haven't completed your Think Ahead, you can get one from the Hospice Foundation, and you should complete it this evening. If there are any questions, thanks very much. And thank you so much for inviting Andrew and I to come and talk with you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's really important. Thank you so much.
Brendan, thank you. I mean, such a comprehensive overview of all of the issues that need to be considered and will be considered in this. It is an important issue. It is an emotive issue, and I admire all of the legal people who are involved, all of the medical people who are involved. If you help to, if you like, give us a sense of perspective and balance on it. I think the other side is hearing from people who have been in the shoes of somebody who has to deal with a prognosis. I just want to pick up on the issue. There's one question in the chat I'll come to in a minute, but also to invite anybody else who has an issue to raise, please put it in the chat. One of the things I'm struck by always is the what's the best word to use? The confidence most people will have in the confidentiality of the conversations they have with their doctors. And to me, it's perfectly logical. It is perfectly logical that this is something that a conversation that will begin at whatever stage, when somebody is healthy, when somebody is of sound mind, with their doctor, so that their wishes, if you like, are known. But it is that trust between doctor and patient, and being led by what a patient wants. One of the issues that was raised early on is, if you like, a possible objection to this was the burden that may be placed on doctors. And you covered that very well in that the numbers are going to be relatively small, that the numbers of doctors who are happy to engage with this and want to assist are able to manage this. But perhaps there's somebody else here online at the moment who I think can probably give us a very good perspective on this. Somebody who's been around the whole issue of death and dying, voluntary assisted dying, for quite some time. And I wonder if Eike Schmook from Holland, whether you would like to make a contribution here about that, the relationship and the service that doctors can provide.
Hello, Eike. Yeah.
Can I do now?
Yeah.
Yes, please. If
you can hear me.
We can Eike, let somebody find you and bring you on screen, because I think it's always
on the screen.
To have a face to a name.
Yes, here I am.
I can come off now. Thank you.
In my experience, it is that you, after long discussions in your relation with the patient and the next of kin, you come to a moment that the patient asks you to help him or her to die. And that is a very from both sides an emotional moment. But in the end, the patient decides the moment to have the intravenous injection and of the lethal medication. In the Netherlands, we have very many safeguards put in the law, and that is regarded and taken care of by the SCAN, Support and Consultation Euthanasia in the Netherlands, founded by the Royal Medical Association, and a review committee afterwards. So we have 2 points for safeguards. And what I think it is important that from the start, when patient asks you if you are able or do you want to help me to die, then it turns out that that you can talk about it freely. And a professor in Ghent showed that the people who know that they will be helped live longer. Mm. And all the discussions you have, why is there still in Ireland a waiting time? For it is not a remark of the patient, of a request of the patient, can you help me to die tomorrow? It is a continued discussion with the patient and the next of kin. And in my opinion, it is the duty of a physician to don't let the patient down at the end, at the moment he or she is the most vulnerable. And pain is not the most important question of the patient. It is the dignity who is lost. That is what the patient needs to solve. You as a doctor can solve that loss of dignity of your patient. And unfortunately, I live in a country where we can do it, and it is just like I heard before that in Canada, more than 60% of the GPs are performing euthanasia. That in the Netherlands is the same amount. In hospitals, doctors are also doing it, but after a long period of discussion with the patient. It is not from one to the other moment.
Maike, that's really useful, thank you. I know we've had discussions before, and I'm sure we're going to carry on again.
Yeah.
And again, thank you for your help throughout, because we've had access to tremendous research-based information. Thank you for your contribution tonight.
Okay.
I just want to open up the opportunity. Gino Kenny, are you still in the room? I think you are. Maybe we can bring Gino on quickly.
Hi, Jenny.
I know you're under pressure.
I'm under pressure. I've gone to another
Always.
Zoom. It's a story of our lives about Zoom meetings talking into a laptop. God, I can't wait for this all this pandemic is over and we can talk to people in a real sense. Look, tonight's a really, really good meeting, and it's very informative and educational and kind of I suppose insightful in relation to this issue. And I can certainly say I'm learning all the time, and there's never a day that goes by that I actually think about this subject, the kind of what we can do better and how we can kind of change the law in Ireland. Just to give people an update where the bill is at, it's hopefully the pre-legislative scrutiny will hopefully begin in May or June, and once that process begins, what that will look like, it's difficult to know. That's up to the committee themselves, the Justice Committee, to kind of give it direction and invite certain, obviously there has to be a broad spectrum of the debate, and that's good. Where it goes after that, it's kind of difficult to know. But I think going back to the vote that happened last October, where a majority of TDs in the Dáil, gave direction to the Parliament to say, look, we need to kind of, look at this issue again, and and to bring it to kind of further scrutinise the bill and the issue. So I look forward to the scrutiny. I look forward to the kind of the debate that's going not only in the Oireachtas itself, but society. And it all points to, in societal terms, that, I think the majority of people do want to see reform or to change the law around voluntary assisted dying. And you see that in different countries. And, the debate has changed, particularly in the last 6 months, by a number of factors. I think a number of, I suppose, people coming forward and explaining their situation. And, I think people in Ireland, obviously things are changing in Ireland. They've been changing for the last 20 years. Obviously we want to see change much quicker. But I think, when people look at this very, very logically, and it's looking at it logically without I suppose, the dogma of religious dogma, and kind of just looking at all the facts. And that's why we always ask people whether, they're kind of concerned about certain things. They have, concerned about that it could be used kind of, in a bad way. But we always say to people, look at the facts. The facts are that, where voluntary assisted dying is legislated for, there is no evidence that it's ever been abused. So that's where I generally say to people, look at the facts and listen to people, because I think that as the debate goes on, I think people's will evolve. Their thinking about this issue will evolve, and they will always, maybe, hopefully, they'll put themselves in that position. And the majority of people that have terminals will never avail this legislation, never, but there will be some people that will want to avail of the legislation. And on that kind of grounds, I think that's where I think the law should change. Where it goes from here, I'm quite optimistic that we will see the change of law, the legislation. I'm confident enough in the next. Again, it's difficult to now put a time frame on this, but there's in the lifetime of this law, which is about another 4 years. I'm confident if things go the way I think it will go. I think in that kind of time frame, there will be a change in the law in around voluntary assisted dying. It will be a process. It will be quite a long process. There will be many kind of twists and turns, but I think, I think the tide is with us at the moment, and it's not going to go out. And once you have that momentum, and that kind of where people see kind of the compassion and the kind of the empathy, where it's putting themselves in that position. What would I do? What would I think? Maybe I would not make that decision, but maybe why should I deny somebody in that situation, that profoundly difficult situation? Why would I deny them that choice? And I think once you put them facts, and like two people, I think the majority of people in Ireland say, look, if that person wants to do that, if a person wants to avail of that legislation, that's their choice. And that's why I'm kind of confident we'll see a change in the law in the foreseeable future. But we'll have to start with the scrutiny first in the Justice Committee, and then the important thing of that, the end of that process, is when it commissions kind of its direction to the Dáil. But at all times, And, you know, we be obs calling for a vote of conscience, which means that there's no party whip. And that's why it kind of got to where it's at the moment. So I think the numbers are there, and I think it will grow over time. People's kind of ideas will have changed, I think, evolve all the time with this issue. So I'm quite confident, you know, in the lifetime of this DAW, which is another 4 years, we will see kind of the change in the law around voluntary assisted dying.
I'm going to jump in there, Gino, and say I hope it doesn't take 4 years.
Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully it doesn't.
Who knows?
Things in the Parliament work so slow. It's incredible.
Oh, I know. But what we're going to do is get a national conversation going. Sheila O'Byrne wrote something in the chat earlier. Do we need a national campaign? The answer is absolutely yes. We want as many people as possible to be having conversations, using any of the information that we put out there, which comes from really good sources, to have conversations that matter, to help people understand that there is a protocol that can be put in place. I would like to thank everyone for being here, especially thanks to Stephen Duckworth, who is he has to leave us. We will be back in touch with Stephen. Thank you to everybody, including people who have joined us from Spain, from the Netherlands, people who will be listening on replay. Judith, Zara, Ken, for sharing your stories as well. Thank you all. MAiD Doyle, very quickly, you had your hand up. I don't know if it's something we can answer now or we can come back to you on. If you'd like to quickly unmute yourself, MAiD, you can throw that last question in.
No question. Just thank you everybody for all that you've spoken and the great comments all the way through. I think I hit the hand by mistake, but thank you again tonight. It's been really powerful.
You are more than welcome. Oh, goodness, my screen completely disappeared then, which really says it's time for supper. Thank you all, and thank you especially as well to Catherine White for signing for this. And what we'll be doing is putting the recording up on YouTube in order that the deaf community also can avail of this. Thank you all. Keep safe, keep well. Good night.
Thank you, Janie. Thank you so much.
Honor. Thank you,
Janie,
for letting us be involved.
well done.
Yeah, thank you so much.